The smell of ink clung to Elias Harrow's hands like a second skin, thick, metallic, and permanent, as if the stories he helped print had seeped into his very blood. Inside Whitlock's print and paper, the clatter of the wooden press beat out a steady rhythm, a heartbeat for the restless town of Boston. It was November of 1773, the harbor winds colder than usual, and rumors even colder still. Samuel Whitlock stood over the press, gray hair tied back, eyes sharp enough to slice vellum. "Not so heavy with the ink, boy," he said without looking, "unless you want His Majesty's face to look more like a soot-covered chimney sweep." Elias laughed. "Perhaps that's fitting." Whitlock raised an eyebrow. "You want the king's men storming through that door? Because that's how you get redcoats storming through that door." Elias wiped excess ink from the plate, but the grin remained. Boston was a powder keg. Everyone knew it. Merchants furious over taxes, sailors grumbling in taverns, and men with names like Hancock and Adams meeting in quiet rooms. And though Elias was only 17, he felt the tension, as if each word he printed added weight to a scale about to tip. He pulled down the lever of the press, the great wooden arm creaking like an old ship mast. When he lifted the plate, the page revealed itself, crisp, bold letters declaring a petition against the tea duty. Illegal, dangerous, exactly what made life interesting. Whitlock inspected the paper. "Good," he said softly. "Good enough that if the crown drags us to court, I'll at least be proud of the craftsmanship." Before Elias could answer, the print shop door swung open, letting in a biting gust and a young woman with a cloak hood pulled low. Elias recognized her instantly. Margaret Hale, her father's tavern, the unofficial headquarters of half the rebellion's whispered rumors. "You're late," Whitlock said, though his voice held warmth. Maggie pulled back her hood, cheeks red from the cold. "The customs officers are crawling everywhere today. I had to wait for one to finish lecturing a street vendor about smuggling oranges." "And did you?" Whitlock asked. "Oh, absolutely," she said with a spark in her dark eyes. "He told me he'd know a smuggler from a mile away, so naturally I smiled sweetly and asked how his wife liked the Dutch lace she bought last week." Whitlock choked on a laugh. Elias didn't bother hiding his own. Maggie placed a small pouch on the work table. "This is from Mr. Revere. He says the committee needs tonight's pamphlets before dusk." Elias's hands tingled, not from the cold, but from the name. Paul Revere, engraver, courier, brandburn, a man whose horse's hooves carried the weight of rebellion. Whitlock opened the pouch. Inside lay a rolled parchment sealed with wax, marked by a tiny stamped eagle. Patriot business. Dangerous business. "Elias," Whitlock said quietly, "close the shutters." Elias obeyed. The sounds of Boston, distant ships, shouting vendors, the occasional bark of a soldier, muffled as he latched the windows. When he turned, Whitlock gestured him closer. Maggie looked between them. "You should let him help," she said. Whitlock hesitated. Elias felt his heart drum against his ribs. Finally, Whitlock handed him the parchment. Elias broke the seal and unrolled it. Instead of words, he found columns of strange symbols, loops and slashes woven together like a spider's web. A cipher. But not one he recognized. "British?" Elias asked. "Intercepted this morning," Maggie said quietly, "near the docks." "How?" Elias asked. She smirked. "Let's just say sailors talk a lot when they've had rum, and even more when they haven't." Whitlock tapped the parchment. "Elias, study it. See what you can make of it." "You're giving it to me?" "You've got a mind for patterns," Whitlock said. "Better than any man I've met." His gaze softened. "And these days, every mind we can trust matters." Maggie leaned against the table, watching Elias closely. "Think you can do it?" Elias swallowed, then nodded. "I can try." As he scanned the symbols, a slow awareness crept up his spine. Whoever wrote this was meticulous. No stray marks, no inconsistencies. This wasn't the clumsy code of merchants or smugglers. This was military. He traced one of the loops with his finger. This looks like an officer's cipher, British intelligence maybe. Maggie's expression tightened. Then it's serious. Whitlock nodded. Deadly serious. Before Elias could speak again, the print shop door thundered with 3 heavy knocks. Maggie's face paled. Whitlock motioned for silence. The knocks came again, forceful, impatient. A voice rang out. "Open in the name of His Majesty's government." Redcoats. Elias's pulse quickened. The cipher in his hands felt suddenly as heavy as a musket. Whitlock whispered sharply, "Maggie, the back room. Elias, hide that parchment, now." Elias rolled it quickly and shoved it inside the hollow space beneath the ink table, sealing the panel just as Whitlock unlocked the front door. 2 redcoats stepped in, boots stamping snow onto the wooden floor. Behind them entered a man not in uniform, black coat, immaculate boots, and eyes sharp as winter glass. Elias felt air leave his lungs. Captain Alastair Crowe, a name whispered among Patriots with the same dread as a loaded rifle. Crowe's gaze drifted over the print shop, lingering on the presses, the shelves, the drying pamphlets. "Good day, Mr. Whitlock," he said, voice smooth as polished steel. "We've had reports of seditious material circulating again, material your shop may have produced." Whitlock bowed stiffly. "I print what I'm paid to print." "And I'm paid," Crowe said, stepping closer, "to ensure that what's printed does not encourage treason." Maggie stayed hidden. Elias kept his hand steady. Crowe lifted one drying sheet, a petition against the tea duty. Careful words, clever phrasing. His eyes flicked to Elias. "Did you set the type, boy?" Elias's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." "A craftsman, then." Crowe stepped nearer, gaze uncomfortably direct. "Words can move armies, you know. A dangerous profession." His gloved hand drifted along the ink table, pausing inches from the hidden cipher. Elias forced himself not to look down. After a long moment, Crowe stepped back. "We'll be monitoring all printing operations henceforth. Keep your work loyal." He turned sharply. The redcoats followed, and moments later the door shut, leaving the print shop thick with silence. Maggie emerged from the back, breath shaky. "That man, he scares me more than tariffs and taxes combined." Whitlock wiped sweat from his brow. For good reason. Elias retrieved the hidden parchment, hands trembling only slightly. "We need to understand the cipher. If Crowe is involved, it matters." Maggie stepped closer, determination burning in her gaze. "Then we do it together." Whitlock nodded. "Tonight, after sundown, the back room." Elias again looked at the cryptic loops and slashes, symbols that suddenly felt like sparks, ready to ignite something far larger than himself. Outside, Boston churned with unrest. Inside, in the dim glow of the print shop, the first ember of a revolution flickered to life. Night had fallen over Boston like a velvet curtain, and the harbor was a mirror of ink and moonlight. The ships, hulking in their quiet majesty, creaked with the cold and the tide, their sails tied down as if bracing for a storm that would come from men, not weather. The lamplight along the wharves flickered, casting long, trembling shadows on the cobblestones. To anyone walking by, the city seemed peaceful. To Elias Harrow, it was a city holding its breath. Inside Whitlock's back room, the air smelled of ink, paper, and the faint tang of candle wax. Elias laid the British cipher across the table, its symbols dancing in the dim light. Maggie stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp and impatient. "Have you figured it out yet?" she asked, though her voice was soft enough not to betray them to prying ears outside. Elias ran his fingers over the loops and slashes. "It's clever," he said, "but there's a pattern, a rhythm. Letters, maybe, hidden under layers of substitution. Whoever made this didn't expect it to fall into the hands of a boy in a print shop." Maggie frowned, "And Captain Crowe will stop at nothing to get it back." Elias nodded grimly, "Which is why we can't waste time. I need you to keep watch, make sure no one sees me working." She gave a half smile, shaking her head. You act like I'm just a lookout. I've been running messages for months. I know the streets better than some of the redcoats. He grinned. Then you're the perfect partner. They worked in silence, the scratching of Elias's quill the only sound. Candlelight flickered across the parchment as he copied the symbols onto a clean sheet, testing possible substitutions, rearranging loops and marking patterns in the margins. Hours passed. Outside, the city groaned with the occasional shuffle of soldiers' boots and the distant barking of a sentinel dog. Every sound felt amplified in the tense quiet. Finally, Elias leaned back. I've got something. There's a key hidden in the first line. I think it's a list of times and locations, movements, British troop movements. It's meant to be delivered to someone in Boston tonight. Maggie's eyes widened. Delivered, so that means someone here knows about it? And Captain Crowe will find them, Elias said. If we don't act fast, it won't just be the documents he's after. It'll be anyone connected. A sudden crash outside made them both freeze. Elias held up a hand. Maggie pressed herself against the wall, listening. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoed down the street. Redcoats. 1, 2, then gone. Whitlock from the shadows muttered, "They're always closer than you think." Elias's mind erased. The cipher wasn't just a set of letters, it was a key to stopping something the British had been planning for months. Operation Iron Chain, as Whitlock had whispered, and if they could decode it, the Patriots might strike first. We have to deliver this to Revere, Elias said, before dawn. Maggie nodded. And if Crowe is on the streets? We'll be ghosts, Elias said, trying to sound braver than he felt. By midnight, Boston's streets were almost deserted. Mist rolled off the harbor, hiding the cobblestones in a thick, damp blanket. Elias and Maggie moved through the shadows, the cipher safely rolled and tied with a strip of cloth. Their destination? Paul Revere's shop, a place as familiar to Patriots as it was dangerous for anyone the British suspected. As they passed the wharves, the water lapped at the pilings, whispering secrets. Elias's eyes flicked to the ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, the Beaver, tea-laden vessels that had become symbols of colonial defiance. He thought of the Tea Act, the protests, the cries of no taxation without representation. And now he and Maggie were part of the silent machinery that could tip the scales. "Do you ever wonder," Maggie whispered as they stepped lightly over a loose stone, "if any of this will matter, if we'll be remembered?" Elias considered the question, stepping lightly over a loose stone. "I hope it matters. Even if no one remembers our names, maybe the city will breathe easier because we did something small." They reached Revere's shop, the door barely larger than a gate in a wall. Inside, Paul Revere worked over a silver engraving, his hands steady and precise, even in the dim lamplight. The man looked up, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "You've got it?" he asked, already understanding. Elias handed him the cipher. Revere unrolled it, scanning the symbols with practiced eyes. His jaw tightened. "This is worse than we feared," he said. "Crowe isn't just looking for sedition, he's planning coordinated attacks across the colony. Troops, supplies, Loyalist spies, everything in motion." Maggie swallowed. "And we have to stop it?" Revere's expression was grim. "We deliver this information to the committees in New Hampshire, New York, Philadelphia, spread it before Crowe realizes it's missing." Elias felt the weight of history settle on his shoulders. They were no longer just a printer and a messenger. They were instruments in a war that had not yet fully begun, and Captain Crowe would be hunting them every step of the way. As dawn approached, they left Revere's shop, the mist thick around them. Every alley felt like a potential trap. Every shadow seemed to watch. Yet, amidst the fear, Elias felt something strange. A thrill. The thrill of being part of something larger than himself. Something that could change the world. At the edge of the harbor, Maggie paused, looking out over the water. "Do you ever think about what happens if we fail?" she asked quietly. Elias thought of the cipher, of Boston, of the freedom still unclaimed. "We can't fail," he said, "because if we do, no one else will stand a chance." The fog swallowed their figures as they disappeared into the streets, two shadows carrying the sparks of revolution into the night. Behind them, the harbor slept,
unaware of the storm about to break.
December 16, 1773, began like any other cold, fog-laden night in Boston, but the city was brimming with a restless tension that made even the cobblestones seem alive. Lamps flickered weakly against the mist, casting wavering shadows as men moved silently along the wharves. By day, Boston was bustling with merchants and sailors, but by night, the city belonged to whispers, conspiracies, and secret plans. Elias Harrow and Margaret Hale stood near Griffin's Wharf, hidden behind barrels and crates of imported goods. Elias's hands shook, not from the cold, but from anticipation. The parchment he had carried, the decrypted cipher, had revealed British troop movements and Loyalist plans. Tonight, the Patriots would strike not with muskets, but with defiance. Maggie adjusted her cloak, tightening the hood over her head. "Do you really think this will work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias glanced up the harbor, the silhouette of three massive ships looming in the fog: the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. The tea they carried, taxed and resented, had become the symbol of British tyranny. "It has to," he said. "If it fails, Crowe's eyes will fall on the wrong people, on all of us." From a distance, muffled voices spoke in code, familiar to those who had trained their ears on months of secret meetings. Figures emerged from the shadows, patriots disguised as Mohawk warriors, their faces painted and garments crude but convincing. Among them, Paul Revere himself moved swiftly, coordinating, whispering orders, ensuring no one strayed from the plan. Elias and Maggie fell in line, moving closer to the Dartmouth, whose massive hull groaned as it rocked against the icy harbor. The other Patriots began to heave crates of tea overboard. The first splash sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Elias held his breath as the next crate followed, then another, until the ship's hold was emptying into the cold water. Maggie watched, awestruck. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "a rebellion in motion." Elias allowed himself a small smile, but there was no time for sentiment. Captain Crowe had been sighted earlier near the harbor, his sharp eyes missing nothing. If he appeared now, it would turn this symbolic act into a massacre. They worked quickly, tossing crates of tea into the water. Each splash felt like a small victory, a protest that could ripple across the colonies. Yet, as their hearts surged with triumph, they remained aware of the danger. "Elias," Maggie whispered urgently, "look!" Across the harbor, a small rowboat moved toward them. The figure in it was unmistakable: Alastair Crowe. His presence was a knife drawn in the darkness, precise and threatening. Elias's pulse quickened. "We need to disappear." But before they could move, Crowe's voice cut through the mist. "Gentlemen and ladies, this rebellion ends tonight." The Patriots froze for a heartbeat, then instinct took over. Elias and Maggie ducked behind crates as Crowe's men moved toward the ships, their boots splashing in the shallow water. The harbor erupted into controlled chaos. Elias pulled Maggie close. "We split. Head for the wharf behind the tavern," he instructed. "I'll meet you at Revere's shop." Maggie nodded, disappearing into the fog. Elias ran silently along the edge of the pier, heart hammering until he reached a stack of empty barrels. From there, he could see Crowe directing his men, barking orders with precision, his eyes scanning for any hint of the rebels. Elias knew he had a choice: stay and fight, or vanish to preserve the cipher and warn the committees. He gritted his teeth and chose survival. The rebellion needed information more than a single life lost tonight. He slipped into the shadows, moving through narrow alleys, across frozen puddles, avoiding patrols. Every step felt like the ticking of a clock counting down to discovery. By the time he reached Revere's shop, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the fog. Inside, the shop was quiet. Revere waited, map spread across the table, his eyes scanning the harbor lines marked with troop positions. "You made it," he said quietly. Elias laid the cipher before him. "Crowe was close," he warned. "We need to get this to the committees before he realizes it's missing." Revere nodded grimly. "Then we ride tonight. New Hampshire, New York, the message must spread before the redcoats can act." Maggie arrived moments later, breathless but smiling. "The tea is in the water. The message and the act is done." Revere studied both of them. "You've made history tonight," he said, though his tone carried the weight of responsibility. "But the real battle begins now. Every step we take from here will be watched, measured, and countered.
Crowe will not forget this. Elias felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from the enormity of what they had done. They had struck a blow against an empire, and yet the empire had many arms. Crowe's reach was one of them, and if he sought vengeance, it would fall on those least expecting it. Outside, the harbor glittered with fragments of tea leaves floating on the surface. The first rays of sunlight turned the water to gold, as if the city itself had been momentarily illuminated by their defiance. But Elias knew that the glow would not last. The British would respond. Crowe would hunt them, and the Cipher, their secret weapon, was still at the center of it all. Maggie touched his arm. "We did it," she whispered. "Boston will never be the same."
Elias nodded, gazing at the harbor, the ships, the mist, the waking city. "Neither will we," he said. And somewhere in the distance, the echo of Crowe's threat lingered, a shadow over the dawn of rebellion.
The morning after the tea party, Boston woke to an uneasy calm. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, merchants banged shutters, and children ran along cobblestone streets, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. But for Elias Harrow and Margaret Hale, the city felt like a cage, the fog hiding enemies in every corner. Word of the tea destruction had spread like wildfire, and with it, the shadow of Captain Alastair Crowe. The British officer had returned to his quarters that night, furious and humiliated. His pride wounded, his obsession ignited. Crowe now vowed to hunt down every soul connected to the rebellion. Elias and Maggie moved cautiously through the streets, the cipher tucked safely in Elias's coat. Every footstep echoed. Every glance over the shoulder was a reminder that Crowe's men could be watching from the shadows. "We can't stay in Boston much longer," Elias said, his voice low. "Crowe will tighten his net. We need to move the cipher to the committees. New Hampshire first, then Philadelphia." Maggie nodded, scanning the quiet streets. "We need disguises, something to throw off anyone tracking us." Revere, always prepared, had anticipated this. At his workshop, he handed them simple clothing, coarse woolen coats, hats pulled low, and boots that wouldn't squeak on wet cobblestones. Elias donned his, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. Maggie pulled her hood tightly, her eyes fierce with determination. "Remember," Revere said, "Crowe is cunning. He'll look for patterns, for anyone who appears too careful or too eager. Trust no one outside these walls." Their first leg of the journey took them north along the narrow Boston Neck, a thin strip of land connecting the city to the mainland. The cold cut through their coats, and the mud threatened to swallow their boots with every step. They moved silently as shadows among shadows, glancing back frequently to ensure no one followed. As they neared Charlestown, a sudden clatter froze them in place. A patrol of redcoats rounded the corner, boots striking stone with lethal rhythm. Maggie grabbed Elias's arm. "Duck!" she hissed. They darted into an alley, hearts hammering, pressing against the wall as the soldiers passed. Crowe's presence wasn't far behind. His men would be questioning every tavern keeper, merchant, and fisherman. Elias exhaled slowly once the patrol moved on. "Too close," he muttered. "Crowe's already tightening the noose." Maggie's jaw was set. "Then we keep moving. Every hour we waste increases the danger." By late afternoon, they reached a safe house Revere had arranged in Cambridge, a modest home of an ally sympathetic to the Patriots. Inside, the warmth of a fire was comforting, but Elias's eyes remained on the door, on the streets beyond. Whitlock's words from weeks ago echoed in his mind. "Every mind we can trust matters." Now, the meaning was clear. Their survival depended not just on stealth, but on intelligence, on allies, and on courage. That night, as they prepared to rest, Maggie spoke quietly, almost to herself.
"Do you think Crowe will ever stop hunting us?" Elias shook his head. "No, and that's why we have to be smarter, faster. We carry the spark now. The rest of the colonies need it more than we need safety." The next morning, their journey continued. They traveled by foot, avoiding main roads, sometimes hitching rides in hidden carts with sympathetic farmers. They moved under the cover of fog, over frozen streams, across fields white with frost. Every town brought new risks: soldiers at checkpoints, Loyalist informers, suspicious tavern keepers. One evening, as they rested near a small village outside Salem, they overheard whispers in the tavern. Crowe had been asking questions, showing portraits of Elias and Maggie and promising rewards for their capture. "We're not just on the run," Maggie said grimly. "We're hunted." Elias placed a hand on the cipher hidden in his coat. "Then we make sure the information reaches those who can act. The more people know, the harder it is for Crowe to stop the rebellion." But Crowe was not a man to be underestimated. Far to the south, in his temporary command post, he pored over maps and lists, piecing together the puzzle. He studied every intercepted message, every rumor and every report from Loyalist informers. His obsession with finding Elias and Maggie became a personal vendetta. "They have the cipher," he muttered, tapping a finger on a map of the colonies. "And I will have it back. Every step they take, I will follow. Every ally they trust, I will uncover. No one escapes me." Back in Salem, Elias and Maggie continued their journey, unaware of just how close Crowe was to discovering their route. Each night brought new dangers: rivers to cross, snow to trudge through, houses to avoid. Yet, amidst the fear, there was determination. They were not just delivering a piece of paper, they were delivering the lifeblood of the revolution, knowledge that could change the course of history. By the time they reached Portsmouth, New Hampshire, exhaustion and frostbitten fingers threatened to undo them. But Revere's plan worked. Trusted patriots waited with fresh horses and supplies, guiding them onward. Each handoff, each safe house was a small victory, a thread in the larger tapestry of rebellion. And always, in the back of Elias's mind was the image of Crowe, cold, calculating, relentless. He would not rest, and neither could they. Elias looked at Maggie as they mounted fresh horses for the final leg northward. "We're running out of time," he said. Maggie's eyes met his. "Then we ride harder, we fight smarter, and we don't look back." As the sun rose over the frost-covered fields, they galloped into the unknown, carrying not just a cipher, but the hope of a revolution. Crowe's hunt had begun, and the game of shadows was only just starting.
The road to Philadelphia was long, winding, and perilous. Elias and Maggie had been traveling for weeks, relying on a network of patriots, sympathetic farmers, and the occasional friendly inn. Each night, they slept in barns or hidden rooms, their bodies stiff with cold and exhaustion, yet their minds were alert, ever watchful for redcoats and Loyalist spies. Philadelphia was different from Boston. Its streets were wider, its buildings taller, and its citizens, though bustling with trade and conversation, carried the weight of politics on their shoulders. The city was alive with discussion of independence, of the coming Continental Congress, and rumors of armed conflict spreading like wildfire through the colonies. Elias adjusted his cloak as they rode through the gates. "We have to be careful here," he said. "Crowe will follow the obvious trails. Couriers, taverns, inns. He won't expect us to hide in plain sight." Maggie nodded. "Then we disappear among the crowds." They moved through the city during market hours, blending into the throngs of merchants, farmers, and laborers. Every glance felt like a threat, every passerby a potential spy. Yet they couldn't afford to linger. The cipher they carried contained information that could shape the strategy of the entire revolution, British troop movements, Loyalist sympathizers, and plans that could cripple the colonies if delivered too late. Their destination was the Committee of Correspondence, a network of patriots coordinating communication between the colonies. Inside a modest building near the Delaware River, Elias and Maggie found a small group of men waiting. Trusted patriots who would ensure the cipher reached New York, then Philadelphia, and finally to the leaders of the Continental Congress. Paul Revere had sent word ahead, and the committee members greeted them with quiet urgency. Maps were spread across tables, pens scratching out movements, ink staining hands and faces. Elias laid the cipher before them, explaining what they had decrypted. "This confirms British plans for coordinated attacks along the northern colonies," Elias said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his bones. "Crowe is orchestrating it personally. If he isn't stopped, he could crush the rebellion before it spreads further." The men exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. One of them, a grizzled veteran named Thomas Kane, looked at Elias with a mixture of respect and concern. "You've done more than your share to bring this to us," he said. "But your work isn't finished. Crowe will not give up, and neither can we." Maggie leaned over the table, pointing to sections of the cipher. "We've identified the key movements. If we can alert the committees in New Hampshire, New York, and Virginia, we might be able to anticipate their actions." Kane nodded. "It's a dangerous path, but someone has to take it, and apparently that someone is you two." The next days were a blur of secret meetings, encoded messages, and late-night rides. Elias and Maggie acted as couriers, slipping between safe houses, delivering letters and reporting on British troop movements. Each day brought new threats, suspicious townsfolk, roving patrols, and the ever-present danger of Crowe. It was during one of these rides, on a narrow road outside Philadelphia, that Elias sensed they were being followed. The clatter of hooves behind them was subtle but unmistakable. "Crowe," Elias muttered, his eyes scanning the tree line. Maggie's hand went to the small dagger at her belt. "We can't outrun him forever," she said. Elias nodded. "Then we don't have to outrun him. We just need to be smarter." They led their pursuers into a dense forest, narrow paths twisting among towering oaks and pines. At a carefully chosen bend, Elias guided their horses into a concealed ditch, then dismounted and led Maggie to a narrow creek that ran through the trees. They waited, hidden by undergrowth, hearts pounding as Crowe and his men passed within yards, unaware of their presence. When the sound of hooves faded, Maggie exhaled, relief mixed with fear. "Every day we survive is a miracle." Elias shook his head. "It's not luck, it's strategy, and Crowe underestimates us at his peril." By the time they reached Philadelphia, the city was buzzing with news of British movements and colonial unrest. Delegates from the Continental Congress were gathering, and every tavern, inn, and coffee house was filled with whispers of independence. Elias and Maggie delivered the cipher to a trusted courier, who would take it directly to the Congress leaders. But their work was far from over. Crowe had not been idle. Reports of his searches and interrogations were spreading, and the city was on edge. Elias and Maggie had to remain in hiding, relying on the network of patriots to shield them from capture. One evening, as they rested in a small attic room above a print shop, Maggie spoke quietly, almost to herself. "Do you ever wonder if all this risk is worth it? If our names will ever matter?" Elias looked out the window at the flickering lanterns below. "Perhaps not our names, but our actions. They will echo. Freedom is built on acts like these, small, dangerous, and unseen by most." Maggie nodded, leaning against him. "Then we continue. For the cause, for Boston, for everyone counting on us." Elias placed a hand over hers. "And we watch each other's backs, always." Outside, the city slept, unaware of the invisible war unfolding in its streets. Inside, in the quiet attic, two young patriots prepared for the next step of a journey that would take them deeper into danger, closer to Captain Crowe, and into the heart of a revolution that had only just begun.
The Delaware River lay cold and dark beneath the waning moon, its surface reflecting shards of starlight like shattered glass. Elias Harrow and Margaret Hale rode along the riverbank, horses' hooves silent on the frost-hardened soil. They had left Philadelphia hours earlier, carrying intelligence that could tip the balance of the revolution, but the night felt heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. "Something's wrong," Elias murmured, scanning the shadows along the opposite bank. Too quiet, too still. Maggie tensed, her hand brushing the hilt of her dagger. "You feel it too?" Elias nodded. "Crowe is near. I can feel it. He's watching, waiting for us to make a mistake." They slowed their pace, moving cautiously along a narrow path between the river and a line of trees. Fog curled over the water, hugging the ground, creating shapes that flickered like specters. Each step forward made Elias's pulse thrum in his ears, every snap of a twig sounding like a gunshot. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a redcoat, rifle leveled, eyes glinting with cold precision. "Stop," he barked. Elias and Maggie bolted, urging their horses into a frantic gallop. Behind them, more soldiers emerged, moving with military precision. The crackle of musket fire split the night air, as Elias ducked behind a large boulder, pulling Maggie down with him. "Split up," Elias shouted. "We can't fight them all at once." They veered in different directions, weaving through the forest, over frozen underbrush, their breaths steaming in the frigid air. Elias's mind raced. Crowe had anticipated their route, laying an ambush with ruthless efficiency. A shadow loomed ahead, blocking his path. Elias froze as Crowe himself stepped into view, pistol raised. His black coat seemed to swallow the moonlight, his eyes cold and merciless. "You can run, boy, but you cannot hide from me." Elias lunged to the side as Crowe fired. The bullet tore through a tree trunk inches from his shoulder, splinters flying. Heart hammering, he rolled into the underbrush, clutching the cipher tightly. Crowe advanced, scanning the forest with deadly focus. Meanwhile, Maggie was trapped in a narrow ravine, surrounded by soldiers. She drew her dagger, her movements precise and calculated. With a swift, controlled motion, she disarmed the nearest soldier, using him as a shield to push past the others. Her breath came in sharp bursts, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Back with Elias, Crowe circled like a predator. "You have caused me much trouble, boy, and yet you continue to defy me. I admire your courage, but it will not save you." Elias's mind raced. He needed a plan, something to turn the tables. Spotting a fallen log, he nudged it with his foot toward the edge of the riverbank. With a swift kick, it toppled, creating a barrier that slowed Crowe's advance. Using the momentary distraction, he scrambled down the embankment and plunged into the icy river. The cold hit him like a shockwave, but he pushed forward, water splashing around him. Crowe hesitated at the bank, weighing pursuit against caution. Elias surfaced, swimming swiftly toward a hidden patch of reeds along the shore. Meanwhile, Maggie had joined him on the opposite bank, both dripping and shivering, but alive. They exchanged a glance, relief mingled with urgency. "We have to move," Elias said, teeth chattering. "He won't let us get far." They abandoned their horses, using the fog and the frozen landscape to conceal their movements. Each step was calculated, deliberate, as they navigated toward a safe house Revere had arranged along the river's northern banks. By dawn, they reached the small cabin, exhausted and soaked, but alive. Inside, a fire roared in the hearth, and a sympathetic farmer provided blankets and food. Elias and Maggie huddled together, listening to the distant sounds of soldiers searching the surrounding woods. Crowe had been clever, ruthless, and relentless, but he had underestimated their determination. The ambush had been a warning, a test of their endurance and cunning. Elias wrapped the cipher in oilcloth, ensuring it stayed dry. "This is only the beginning," he said.
Crowe will hunt us at every turn. We need allies, safe passages, and every ounce of weight we have." Maggie nodded, determination etched in her features. "Then we stay ahead, we move fast, we strike smart, and we never let him corner us." Outside, the fog lifted as the first rays of sunlight touched the frozen river. The world seemed calm, serene, almost deceivingly peaceful. But Elias knew the storm was far from over. Crowe was out there, and the game of cat and mouse had only just begun. In that quiet dawn, Elias and Maggie made a silent promise. No matter the danger, no matter the cost, they would deliver the intelligence, protect the revolution, and face whatever shadows awaited them, together.
The smoke from the cabin's hearth curled upward, carrying the scent of burning pine and warmth into the chilly morning air. Elias and Maggie sat close together, wrapped in heavy blankets, the cipher laid carefully between them on a small wooden table. Their bodies were stiff and sore, but their minds were restless, each moment weighed with the knowledge that Captain Crowe was hunting them relentlessly. Outside, the world seemed calm, but they knew better. Every shadow in the trees could hide an enemy. Every passing traveler might be a spy for the crown. "We can't keep running blindly," Elias said, rubbing his hands together. "Crowe will anticipate our every move if we don't start thinking 2 steps ahead. We need a plan, a network of safe houses, couriers, and trusted allies." Maggie nodded, her dark eyes sharp. "And we need to know who we can trust. Every contact we make could be a trap." Their small cabin, tucked in the woods north of Philadelphia, had become a temporary headquarters. Elias spread out a map of the northern colonies across the table, the candlelight flickering over rivers, forests, and towns marked in careful ink. "Here," he said, pointing to the Delaware and Susquehanna rivers, "we can follow the rivers inland, less chance of encountering soldiers or patrols on the main roads. If we move carefully, we can relay the cipher to the committees in New York and Boston without detection." Maggie leaned closer. "And we'll need diversions. Crowe's obsession with capturing us is his weakness. If we leave false trails, we can split his forces, buy ourselves time." Elias's mind raced. He recalled the ambush on the Delaware. Crowe's planning had been meticulous, almost surgical, but his reliance on predictable tactics could be exploited. A decoy here, a delayed courier there, and they could stay one step ahead. As the day passed, they prepared for the next leg of their journey. Elias wrapped the cipher in a layer of oilcloth and hid it inside the hollow of a walking staff, a method Whitlock had taught him months earlier. Maggie sharpened her dagger and double-checked the small flintlock pistol she carried for emergencies. Every detail mattered. Every precaution could mean the difference between life and death. By dusk, they set out again, moving through the forest paths with the silent precision of hunters. Their journey took them past frozen streams and snow-laden fields, their horses picking cautious steps over uneven ground. "You think Crowe will ever give up?" Maggie asked softly, her voice carrying over the crunch of snow underfoot. Elias shook his head. "Never, but obsession makes people predictable. That's what we'll use against him." They arrived at a small village just as night fell, and a sympathetic innkeeper greeted them with a quiet nod, ushering them into a hidden room in the back. Inside, they met another patriot, Jonathan Wells, a wiry man with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. He had been sent by Revere to assist in coordinating the safe passage of messages and intelligence. Jonathan wasted no time. "Crowe is moving faster than we anticipated. He's questioned merchants, farmers, and anyone who might have seen you. If he discovers your route, the cipher and all of us are in grave danger." Elias placed the walking staff with the hidden cipher on the table. "That's why we're changing tactics. We'll split our movements, some decoys to draw attention, others to carry the cipher. Crowe won't know which is real." Maggie's eyes narrowed. "It's risky. One misstep and everything falls apart." Jonathan nodded. "Risk is the constant companion of patriots, but with careful planning, we can outmaneuver him. The message must reach New York or the northern colonies will be vulnerable." For hours they strategized, marking safe houses, alternate paths, and contingency plans. Every step of the journey was accounted for, every possible threat considered.
By the time they finished, the room was thick with maps, papers, and the tension of impending danger. Finally, Elias leaned back, exhaustion and resolve etched on his face. "We move at first light. Crowe won't know where we're headed, but we'll make sure the message reaches its destination." Maggie placed a hand on his arm. "And we'll survive. We have to." Outside, smoke from chimneys mingled with the fog, curling into the night sky like ghostly fingers. In the distance, the faint sound of hooves echoed, a reminder that Crowe's shadow was never far. As they rested for a few hours, Elias thought of Boston, of the harbor, and of the moment the first crate of tea plunged into the water. The revolution had begun, and every act of defiance mattered. But the path ahead was fraught with danger, and the specter of Crowe loomed over every step. When dawn broke, they were ready. With Jonathan guiding them through secret paths, they moved swiftly, carrying the cipher deeper into the northern colonies. Decoy messages were left along false routes to mislead pursuers. Every town passed, every safe house reached, was a victory in the silent war waged in shadows. Crowe, meanwhile, had grown more frustrated with each failed attempt to intercept them. His obsession intensified, his tactics became more ruthless, and his anger burned hotter with each delay. But Elias and Maggie, with careful planning and unwavering resolve, stayed ahead, two shadows moving through the landscape of a revolution, carrying the spark that could ignite an entire nation. By nightfall, they reached the outskirts of Albany, New York, weary but alive. The message was still intact, the cipher secure, and the network of Patriots ensured they would continue to the next leg. Elias looked at Maggie, determination in his eyes. "We've made it this far, but Crowe will not rest. The hunt continues." Maggie nodded, her breath visible in the cold night air. "Then we keep moving, for Boston, for the colonies, for freedom." And as the smoke from nearby chimneys drifted upward, mingling with the fog of the early evening, Elias knew the truth. The revolution was no longer a distant promise. It was here, alive in the hands of those willing to risk everything, and the game with Captain Crowe had only just begun.
The forests outside Albany were dense, shrouded in a heavy mist that clung to the trees like a ghostly veil. Elias Harrow and Margaret Hale moved carefully, their boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Each step brought the distant sound of flowing water closer, and each snap of a twig beneath their feet felt magnified in the quiet, almost ominous silence. Jonathan Wells led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for danger. "Crowe is relentless," he said quietly. "He's using Loyalist informers, spies in towns, even fishermen along the rivers. We can't trust anyone outside our immediate circle." Elias nodded, his hand brushing over the walking staff that held the cipher. "We've come too far to fail now. Every second matters." Maggie's gaze swept the shadows. "Do you think he's close?" Jonathan hesitated, then shook his head. "Close enough to be dangerous. He's learned from our last encounters. Crowe doesn't make mistakes, at least not often." The path narrowed, forcing them single file. Elias noticed the ground, footprints that didn't match their own, prints of heavy boots pressed deeply into the soft soil. Crowe's men were near. "Stop," Elias whispered, signaling the others. They crouched, listening. In the distance, the rhythmic clatter of boots on stone and a faint murmur of voices confirmed their suspicion. Crowe's patrol was ahead, and they were walking straight into a trap. Maggie's hand went to her dagger. "We need another route," she whispered. Jonathan shook his head. "It's too late for detours. Crowe expects us to evade, to scatter, to panic. If we hesitate, we're dead. We have to use the terrain, turn the trap against him." Elias studied the area. A steep ravine on the left, a thick tangle of brush to the right, and a fallen log bridge spanning a narrow creek. His mind raced. If they could force Crowe's men to follow them over the bridge and collapse it, they might buy enough time to escape. "On my mark," Elias whispered. "We split. Maggie left, Jonathan right. All lead to Decoy." The plan was risky, too risky perhaps, but there was no alternative. They moved forward cautiously, and soon the patrol emerged from the mist. Crowe himself was at the front, eyes scanning with ruthless precision. His black coat glimmered faintly in the low light, and his hand rested on his pistol. Elias stepped into view, calling out boldly,
Over here." His eyes narrowed. "Ah, the young Patriot. Come to face me, have you?" The soldiers surged forward, following Elias. Maggie and Jonathan slipped into the shadows, moving swiftly through the brush. Elias ran toward the log bridge and the patrol in hot pursuit. The sound of Crowe's voice echoed through the forest. "Don't let him escape!" Elias reached the bridge and leapt aside at the last second. The patrol continued forward, boots striking wood. With a decisive kick, he dislodged a large log, causing the bridge to collapse under the weight of the soldiers. Shouts and splintering wood filled the air. Crowe barely avoided the debris, his eyes blazing with fury. "Clever," he muttered, his voice like steel. "But it won't save you next time." Elias dashed into the thick forest, heart pounding, adrenaline fueling each step. Behind him, the sounds of confusion and retreat echoed. Maggie and Jonathan converged at the rendezvous point, and together the trio pressed onward, deeper into the northern wilderness. After hours of cautious travel, they reached a safe house hidden in a clearing, a modest log cabin guarded by loyal patriots. Inside they collapsed, soaked in sweat and mud, breathing heavily but alive. Jonathan placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "You did well. That trap could have ended us, but you turned it into an advantage. Crowe underestimated your ingenuity." Elias shook his head, still catching his breath. "We were lucky. Luck won't always be on our side." Maggie sat quietly, sharpening her dagger. "Crowe won't stop. He's patient, and obsession makes him dangerous. He'll be watching the towns we pass, the roads we take, the rivers we cross. Every step from now on is a risk." Outside, the forest was silent again, but the weight of pursuit lingered. Crowe was not just a threat. He was a shadow, moving unseen, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elias looked at the cipher hidden in his staff. Its contents were vital: British troop movements, Loyalist plans, and a blueprint for disrupting the rebellion before it could spread. If it fell into Crowe's hands, the colonies could lose the fragile advantage they had gained. "We keep moving," Elias said firmly. "We deliver the cipher, or all this, all the risk, will have been for nothing." Jonathan nodded. "Tomorrow we head toward Lake George. From there, safer paths take us into upstate New York and eventually to the Mohawk Valley. Crowe will have difficulty tracking us in that terrain." Maggie's eyes, dark and fierce, met Elias's. "Then we move at first light, together. No hesitation." As the fire burned low and the night deepened, Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The revolution was no longer a distant cause. It was alive in their hands, fragile and dangerous. Every step they took, every choice they made, could alter the course of history. And somewhere in the shadows of the northern forests, Crowe's eyes gleamed, patient, obsessed, ready to strike again.
The morning air was sharp and biting, carrying the scent of pine and frozen earth as Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan pressed onward. The path to the Mohawk Valley was treacherous. Dense forests, rocky outcrops, and frozen streams challenged every step. The three moved cautiously, aware that Crowe's reach extended far, and any misstep could mean capture or worse. Jonathan led the way, his knowledge of the terrain invaluable. "The Mohawk Valley is sparsely populated," he said quietly. "Fewer roads, fewer Loyalist spies, but it's still dangerous. Crowe will anticipate the obvious routes, so we stay off the beaten path." Elias adjusted the walking staff concealing the cipher. Every step carried the weight of responsibility. The intelligence they carried could tip the scales of war, but only if it reached the committees in New York. The forest thickened as they descended into a narrow valley, fog curling around tree trunks like restless spirits. Frozen leaves crunched underfoot, masking the sound of their approach. Yet Elias could feel eyes on them. Every rustle of branches, every distant animal cry seemed amplified, a potential signal of danger. "We need to cross the river before nightfall," Jonathan whispered. "Once we're on the other side, the terrain favors us. Crowe can follow the main roads, but these woods, they don't suit his redcoats." Maggie glanced at the frozen Mohawk River, its surface slick with ice. We cross carefully. One slip and we risk more than just our lives. They moved along the bank, scouting for a safe crossing. A narrow section of ice seemed stable, though groaning faintly under the weight of wind and water. Jonathan tested it first, stepping cautiously. The ice held. One by one they followed, tense and alert. Halfway across, a sharp crack echoed beneath their feet, and a small section of ice splintered. Elias lunged, grabbing Maggie's arm and pulling her to safety as the ice shifted, threatening to throw them into the frigid water. They reached solid ground, shivering but alive. "Close call," Elias muttered, breath misting in the cold air. Maggie nodded, brushing snow from her cloak. "Too close. Crowe would have loved to find us in the river." Jonathan pointed toward the far bank. "We need to keep moving. Safe houses are scarce, and every hour delays the Cipher's delivery." As they advanced into the valley, signs of Crowe's pursuit became evident. Broken branches, footprints pressed into the mud, and small camps abandoned in haste suggested that his scouts had been nearby. Crowe was learning, adapting, always one step behind, but closing fast. By late afternoon, they encountered a small Iroquois village. The Mohawk people, wary but sympathetic to the Patriots, offered guidance and supplies. Elias and Maggie were cautious. Any mistake could expose them to Loyalist informers. An elder named Onyo-Ta'aka spoke quietly to Jonathan. "The Whitecoats have passed this way," he said. "They are relentless, but you may find refuge in the highlands beyond the river. Few travel there. The forest is your shield." Elias nodded, grateful. "Thank you. We'll move carefully." With renewed determination, they set off toward the highlands, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like claws across the frozen valley. Night fell, and the cold deepened. They built a small fire in a concealed clearing, eating sparingly and keeping watch in shifts. Every crackle of the flames, every rustle of leaves outside the firelight heightened their senses. Maggie sat close to Elias, eyes scanning the dark forest. "Do you think Crowe will ever give up?" Elias shook his head. "Obsession doesn't allow for giving up, but his persistence is also his weakness. He follows patterns, predicts movements. That's what we exploit." Hours passed, and the fire dwindled to embers. Exhaustion pressed upon them, but the knowledge that the revolution depended on their success kept them alert. As dawn broke, they resumed their journey, the highlands stretching ahead, rugged and unwelcoming. They moved cautiously, using natural ridges and dense brush to conceal their passage. Crowe's scouts were likely still nearby, watching for signs of movement, yet the terrain worked in their favor. Elias led the way, checking the walking staff. The Cipher remained safe, hidden, intact. Every mile they covered was another step toward freedom and another step away from Crowe's grasp. Maggie, though weary, stayed vigilant. "We've made it this far. We can't falter now." Elias glanced at her, determination mirrored in her eyes. "We won't. The colonies depend on us. Crowe may hunt us, but we carry the spark of rebellion, and we will see it reach those who can act." By midday, the forest began to thin, revealing a distant river valley that promised both a path forward and a temporary reprieve from immediate danger. The Mohawk Valley, vast and wild, offered both challenge and sanctuary. It was a place where Patriots could hide, plan, and continue the fight. But Elias knew the truth. Crowe would never stop. He was relentless, patient, and ruthless. The hunter's shadow loomed over every step, and the web of pursuit tightened with each passing hour. As they pressed on, the trio understood that their journey was far from over. The Cipher, their secret, and their lives were intertwined in a game of strategy, survival, and courage. The revolution depended on them, and the Mohawk Valley would become both a sanctuary and a battleground in the silent
was
war
narrow
that
and
stretched
treacherous,
across the
winding
colonies.
along cliffs and dense forests that concealed hidden dangers. Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan moved cautiously, the walking staff concealing the cipher pressed firmly against Elias's side. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and distant smoke. Every step brought them closer to the fort, but also deeper into danger. "Fort Edward is a strategic point," Jonathan whispered. "It's heavily monitored by Loyalists, but there are allies inside who can help us move further north. We need to make contact carefully. One wrong move and Crowe could intercept us." Elias nodded, scanning the trees and riverbanks. "We've come too far to be careless. Every choice matters." As they approached the fort at dusk, a lone rider appeared from the tree line, moving swiftly toward them. Elias's heart skipped a beat. "Friend or foe?" he muttered under his breath. The rider stopped a few yards away, dismounting smoothly. "I've been sent to guide you safely inside," he said, his tone calm and practiced. "Name's Samuel Trask, Friends of the Cause." Jonathan studied him carefully, noting the confident stride and the gleam of the sword at his hip. "We'll follow, but any sign of deceit and we turn back," he said firmly. Trask nodded, seemingly unfazed. "Understood. Trust is earned, not given." They followed him through winding paths, thick woods, and along riverbanks, finally reaching the outskirts of Fort Edward. Soldiers patrolled the walls, and watchtowers loomed overhead. Trask led them through a discreet gate into the shadows of the fort's interior, where trusted patriots awaited. "Inside, you'll be safe," Trask assured them. "But we must act quickly. Crowe is closer than you know." The fort's interior was a maze of wooden buildings and stone walls, filled with the quiet murmurs of soldiers and civilians. Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan felt a momentary sense of relief, but it was fleeting. That night, as they rested in a small room provided by the fort's commander, Elias spread out the cipher, reviewing the decrypted sections. Maggie kept watch by the window, eyes scanning the moonlit landscape. "We need to leave before dawn," Elias whispered. "Crowe's men will be combing the roads and rivers. Even inside the fort, we can't afford to linger." "I know, I've arranged horses and guides for the next leg." But he hesitated, glancing at the door. "We must trust no one too quickly. Loyalty is fragile, especially when reward and fear intermingle." Before Elias could respond, a soft knock sounded at the door. Trask entered, smiling warmly. "All set for your departure. But you'll need to leave quietly. Take the back gate, avoid the patrols." Elias and Maggie exchanged wary glances, but followed his instructions, moving silently through the shadowed corridors. Outside, the night was cold and still, fog rolling along the riverbanks like a silent warning. As they mounted their horses and prepared to depart, a sudden shout rang out. Soldiers emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. Crowe's emblem was unmistakable, stitched onto their coats. Elias's heart sank. "Betrayal!" he shouted. Trask stepped forward, sword in hand, blocking their path. "I'm afraid the reward for the young Patriots was too tempting," he said calmly. "Captain Crowe will be pleased." Maggie drew her dagger, her eyes blazing. "We trusted you." Trask's smirk was cold. "Trust is a luxury in war. Now surrender, and perhaps your lives will be spared." Elias acted instinctively. He thrust the walking staff, striking Trask and breaking the initial line of attack. Horses reared, fog mingling with the sounds of clashing steel and shouting. Jonathan and Maggie fought with precision, using their knowledge of the terrain and the element of surprise. Crowe's men pressed the attack, but Elias led the group through a narrow forest path,
using the trees and uneven ground to slow the Loyalists. Bullets whizzed past, and branches tore at clothing and flesh, but the trio pressed forward, driven by necessity and sheer will. After a tense chase, they reached a hidden ravine where they could regroup. Trask and Crowe's immediate pursuers were temporarily blocked by fallen trees and rough terrain. Elias and Maggie breathed heavily, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Jonathan wiped blood from a cut on his forehead. That was too close. Crowe's net is tightening. He has eyes everywhere. Elias nodded, clutching the walking staff. And now we know. Even supposed allies can betray us. Trust must be earned, constantly tested. Crowe's reach is longer than we imagined. Maggie sheathed her dagger, eyes fierce with determination. Then we move faster. Crowe thinks he can corner us, but we'll be shadows he can't grasp. The Cipher must reach New York. No one, no traitor, will stop us. As the first rays of dawn touched the frozen river and mist hung over the valley, the trio pressed onward, hearts racing, senses sharp. The betrayal at Fort Edward had shaken them, but it had also strengthened their resolve. Crowe's obsession was clear, but so was their mission. Deliver the Cipher, evade capture, and keep the spark of rebellion alive. The web was tightening, the danger more acute. But Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan knew one truth above all. They could not falter, for the fate of the northern colonies depended on their courage, cunning, and unbreakable will.
The morning fog hung thick over the rugged slopes of the Adirondacks, turning the dense forest into a labyrinth of shadow and silence. Elias Harrow, Margaret Hale, and Jonathan Wells pressed onward, their breath visible in the frigid air, each exhale mingling with the mist. The betrayal at Fort Edward still burned in Elias's mind, a sharp reminder that trust could be deadly. Jonathan led the way, navigating the twisting trails and rocky inclines with the practiced ease of someone who knew these woods intimately. "We're entering terrain Crowe doesn't know well," he said quietly. "The Adirondacks are vast and unforgiving, but that's our advantage. If we use the landscape correctly, he won't catch us easily." Elias adjusted the walking staff, concealing the Cipher, feeling the weight of responsibility in every step. "We can't afford mistakes. Every moment Crowe's behind us, the colonies are at risk. This information must reach New York." Maggie rode close beside him, eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. "Do you think Crowe's scouts are still following?" she asked, her voice tense. Jonathan shook his head. "Some may have been lost in the forest after last night's skirmish, but Crowe is resourceful. He'll regroup and attempt another trap. We can't let our guard down." The path narrowed as they ascended a ridge, rocky outcrops forcing them to dismount and lead their horses. Each step was deliberate, careful, balancing on icy stone and loose gravel. Every snap of a branch or distant animal call set their nerves on edge. Hours passed with the forest stretching endlessly around them, a maze of snow-laden trees and shadowed valleys. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of their horses' tack and the crunch of frozen underbrush underfoot. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing overlooking a steep drop to a river below. The view was both breathtaking and perilous. The river, half frozen and flowing swiftly, glinted in the weak winter sunlight. Jonathan steadied it carefully. "This is our path," he said. "We follow the river north. Crowe won't anticipate the cliffs and rapids. The terrain is too dangerous for his men." Elias nodded. "It's risky, but we have no choice." They descended carefully, using ropes and makeshift footholds to guide their horses down the slope. The wind cut through their cloaks, and the icy mist from the river spray chilled them to the bone. Yet the sight of the northern forest beyond, vast and untamed, offered a glimmer of hope. As night approached, they made camp in a concealed hollow along the riverbank. The fire was small, careful, designed to give warmth without revealing their position.
Maggie sharpened her dagger, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. "Crow won't stop," she said quietly. "He'll keep chasing us until one of us falls. We need to anticipate his moves, not just react." Elias stared into the fire, hands wrapped around the staff. "Every skirmish, every ambush, every mile we've traveled, Crow adapts, but so do we. He underestimates what desperation and determination can accomplish." Jonathan nodded. "Tomorrow we cross the river and enter the forests of the upper Mohawk Valley. From there, the path to the northern settlements becomes safer and we can begin relaying the cipher to our contacts." The night was long, filled with the distant sounds of the wilderness. Owl calls, rustling leaves, the faint snap of branches under unseen feet. Every noise could signal danger, every shadow a potential threat. Yet amidst the fear and tension, there was a bond among the three. Shared purpose, shared determination, and shared survival. At dawn, they resumed their journey, moving swiftly through the riverine forest. The path was treacherous, but the advantage was theirs. The vast wilderness slowed pursuit, giving them precious hours to advance. As they crossed the river on makeshift rafts, Elias kept the cipher safe, hidden inside the staff. The current was strong, threatening to tip the rafts into the icy water. Horses struggled, but careful guidance kept them afloat. Once on the north bank, they pressed into the dense forest where sunlight barely pierced the canopy. Hours later, they reached a hidden settlement of sympathetic Patriots, a small cluster of cabins tucked away from main roads. There, they found refuge, food, and the knowledge that the next leg of their journey toward Lake Champlain and onward to New York was within reach. But Crow's shadow was never far. Reports from local allies hinted at his relentless pursuit, his growing obsession. He had learned from previous mistakes, adapting his tactics and spreading fear among Loyalists and Patriots alike. Every safe house they used could be compromised, every contact a potential traitor. Elias looked at Maggie and Jonathan. "The next stretch will be the hardest. Crow will anticipate our route, and the terrain ahead is unforgiving, but we can't stop. The revolution depends on it." Maggie's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. "Then we move, and we fight, not just for survival, but for the cause. No one, not even Crow, can stop what we carry." As the forest closed around them, the trio pressed onward, shadows moving through the vast wilderness of the Adirondacks. The path was perilous, the chase relentless, but the spark of rebellion burned brighter than any fear. In the distance, the faint sound of hooves echoed, a reminder that Crow was patient, resourceful, and relentless. The web was tightening, but Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan were determined to remain just out of reach, carrying the cipher that could alter the course of history.
The morning sun broke weakly over the northern forests, casting long shadows across snow-covered pines and frozen streams. Elias Harrow, Margaret Hale, and Jonathan Wells pressed forward, their breaths fogging in the frigid air. Beyond the dense tree line lay Lake Champlain, a vast expanse of ice and water that marked the frontier between the northern colonies and British-held territories. Crossing it was both perilous and necessary. Jonathan scanned the horizon. "Once we reach the lake, we'll have two options. Winter ice allows a faster crossing, but it's treacherous. The waters are deep, and ice can break at any moment. We need to be careful." Elias adjusted the walking staff, concealing the cipher. The weight of the mission pressed heavier with every mile. One slip, one careless step, and everything, the intelligence, the revolution, their lives, could be lost. Maggie rode beside him, eyes sharp and vigilant. "Do you think Crow has scouts near the lake?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Without a doubt. He knows the northern route better than we do now, and he will anticipate our crossing. He's patient, but patient can also mean dangerous. We can't underestimate him." The forest thinned as they descended toward the lake, revealing a landscape both beautiful and foreboding. Snow-covered hills rolled toward the icy waters, dotted with evergreens and jagged rocks. The wind carried a biting chill, whipping through their cloaks and freezing their fingers despite gloves. They moved cautiously along a hidden path, avoiding the main roads that might reveal their presence. Signs of Crowe's pursuit became apparent: broken branches, prints in the snow, and the occasional abandoned campsite. Each clue reinforced the urgency of their journey. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of Lake Champlain. The vast expanse of ice stretched toward the horizon, shimmering under the pale sunlight. Jonathan inspected the ice carefully, testing its thickness with a long pole. "It's stable for now, but we move quickly. One wrong step and the current will take us." Elias nodded. "Let's keep the cipher hidden and travel light. Speed is our ally." They began the crossing, careful to distribute weight evenly and maintain a steady pace. The ice groaned underfoot, a warning of the fragile surface beneath. Every crack and pop echoed ominously across the frozen expanse. Halfway across, distant figures appeared on the opposite shore. Redcoats moving along the trees. Crowe's scouts had anticipated our route. Elias's heart raced. "Keep calm," he whispered. "Steady and silent." The trio pressed on, each step deliberate, eyes scanning the distant figures. The scouts paused, observing, but the vastness of the ice gave the trio room to maneuver. Jonathan guided them along a safer, thicker section of ice, avoiding cracks and weak patches. Finally, they reached the far shore, sliding onto solid ground with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The scouts were too far to engage immediately, but the message was clear. Crowe was closer than ever. They pressed into the dense forest beyond the lake, following hidden paths known only to sympathetic locals and guides. Every step brought them further from immediate danger, but the northern frontier was harsh, filled with natural obstacles, icy streams, steep ridges, and deep snowdrifts that threatened to slow or trap them. Night fell, and they made a concealed camp under a cluster of evergreens. The fire was small, controlled, enough to provide warmth without revealing their position. Maggie kept watch, while Elias and Jonathan rested briefly, listening to the distant howls of wolves and the whisper of the wind through the trees. "We're close to New York," Elias said quietly, studying the map. "If we can reach the Mohawk settlements, we can hand the cipher to trusted Patriots who will carry it to the committee. But Crowe's shadow grows longer with every mile." Maggie tightened her cloak around her shoulders. "Then we move fast. The northern frontier is our advantage now, but it won't protect us forever. Crowe adapts, and he will find a way." Jonathan nodded. "Tomorrow, we descend toward the Mohawk River, using the frozen tributaries and hidden trails. It's a difficult path, but it minimizes encounters with his scouts." The night was long and silent, filled with tension. Every rustle, every crack of ice, and every distant sound set their nerves on edge. Yet amidst the fear, there was resolve. They were carrying a mission larger than themselves, a secret that could determine the outcome of the northern campaign of the Revolution. At dawn, they broke camp and moved swiftly, the pale sun glinting off the frozen landscape. The forests gradually thinned, giving way to open snowfields and frozen rivers that led toward the Mohawk Valley. Despite exhaustion and the constant threat of Crowe, Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan pressed onward. The northern frontier had tested their endurance, skill, and courage, but it had also sharpened their wits, strengthened their bond, and reminded them of the stakes. The revolution was in motion, and every step they took brought it closer to victory or disaster. In the distance, dark figures moved among the trees. Crowe scouts, relentless and patient, closing the net. The chase continued, but Elias felt a steely resolve settle in his chest. No matter the obstacles, no matter the betrayal, they would deliver the cipher. The northern frontier was harsh, but it was theirs, for now.
The sun rose pale and cold over the rolling hills of the Mohawk Valley, casting long shadows across snow-covered fields and frozen rivers. Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan pressed forward, weary but vigilant. After the perilous crossing of Lake Champlain, the safety of the Mohawk settlements was close, but the northern frontier had taught them that even the smallest villages could conceal danger. Jonathan led the way through narrow forest paths, pointing out natural landmarks and hidden trails known only to local guides. "These settlements are allies," he said quietly, "patriots and sympathizers who will help us relay the cipher to the committees in New York. But Crowe's men have been here before. Trust cautiously." Elias nodded, adjusting the walking staff concealing the cipher. Every step felt heavier, burdened not just by snow and fatigue, but by the knowledge that the intelligence in his possession could shape the future of the northern colonies. Maggie scanned the trees and surrounding hills, eyes sharp for movement. "Do you think Crowe will find his way here?" she asked, voice low. Jonathan's expression was grim. "Not immediately, but he's relentless. He'll anticipate the most logical routes, the obvious allies, the safe houses. We must act with caution." They entered the outskirts of a small Mohawk settlement, a cluster of wooden cabins and trading posts nestled along the banks of a partially frozen river. Smoke rose from chimneys, and children's laughter echoed faintly through the crisp morning air. It was a stark contrast to the perilous wilderness they had just crossed. An elder greeted them at the entrance, eyes wary but welcoming. "You come with urgent news," he said, voice low. "Follow me." Inside a modest cabin, Elias unwrapped the cipher, revealing the carefully encoded intelligence. The elder, along with several trusted patriots, examined the contents. Murmurs of approval and concern rippled through the room. "This information is vital," the elder said, pointing to sections detailing British troop movements and Loyalist networks. "If it reaches the committees in New York, it could prevent a coordinated attack on the northern colonies. But it is dangerous to move it quickly. Crowe's spies are everywhere." Elias and Maggie exchanged a glance. "We need to split," Elias said. "The message must move faster than Crowe's men can intercept. One path to New York, one to Albany, and decoys to mislead pursuers." Jonathan nodded. "We'll organize guides, horses, and trusted messengers. But remember, Crowe's obsession is unpredictable. Even here within Allies' walls, vigilance is paramount." As they prepared to dispatch the couriers, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Snow crunched under heavy boots and shouts echoed through the valley. "Redcoats! They've found the village!" a young scout shouted. Chaos erupted. Patriots rushed to secure the settlement, warning families to hide and leading the horses and supplies into concealed locations. Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan grabbed the cipher, moving toward the rear exit. Crowe's scouts, well-trained and relentless, were combing the village with methodical precision. Elias realized they had been spotted too soon. Crowe had anticipated their northern route once again. "Split," Elias shouted. "We divide and lead them away from the safe house." Maggie and Jonathan nodded, and the trio darted into the dense forest beyond the cabins. Snow sprayed beneath their boots as they raced through the trees, using hidden trails and natural cover to evade pursuit. Crowe's men followed, the sound of rifles and shouts close behind. Hours passed in the tense chase, the forest growing darker as night fell. The snow-covered ground slowed both pursuers and pursued, but Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan knew the terrain better. They led Crowe's scouts toward a series of hidden ravines and frozen streams, using the wilderness to their advantage. Eventually, they reached a secluded hollow, safe for the moment. Elias checked the walking staff. The cipher remained secure. Breathing heavily, Maggie spoke first. "Crowe's obsession is dangerous, but it's also predictable. He follows logic, patterns, and that's how we stay ahead." Jonathan nodded. "This settlement is safe for now, but we can't linger. We need to relay the cipher further north, closer to Albany and then New York. Crowe's net tightens with every delay." Elias studied the northern horizon, snow-capped ridges stretching toward Albany. "The Mohawk Valley is our shield, but it's also a trap if we move carelessly. We have allies here, but Crowe's reach is long. The next steps must be calculated with precision." Maggie placed a hand on his arm. "Then we move at first light together. No hesitation. We've come too far to fail now." Outside, the valley lay silent once more, the night wind rustling the trees and carrying the faint sounds of distant rivers. The Mohawk settlements were a temporary haven, a chance to regroup and plan, but danger lingered in every shadow, and the relentless pursuit of Crowe reminded them that the revolution was still a perilous game of survival, strategy, and courage. Elias looked at Maggie and Jonathan, determination in his eyes. "We protect the cipher, we outsmart Crowe, and we deliver this message. The northern frontier in the Mohawk Valley have given us a chance. Now we use it." As the fire dwindled and the night deepened, the trio prepared for the next leg of their journey. Crowe's shadow loomed ever closer, but Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan knew one truth. The fate of the northern colonies and the revolution itself rested in their hands.
The early morning sun glinted off the rooftops of New York, casting long shadows over streets still quiet from the dawn chill. Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan moved swiftly through the narrow alleys, hearts pounding, knowing that Captain Crowe was closing in relentlessly. The final leg of their mission had arrived: deliver the cipher safely to the Committee of Correspondence. Jonathan led them to a discreet meeting place, a small cellar beneath a bakery known only to trusted patriots. Inside, the committee members waited, eyes sharp and tense. Elias carefully withdrew the walking staff and revealed the cipher. The room fell silent as the men and women scanned its contents. Troop movements, Loyalist plots, and British strategies meticulously encoded. This will change everything," one member whispered, voice shaking. "If this reaches Boston and Philadelphia, we can preempt their attacks and strengthen the northern colonies." Maggie's eyes met Elias's. "We've risked everything for this moment." Just as relief began to settle, a shadow moved near the entrance. Crowe had tracked them, his obsession leading him straight to the committee's safe house. His black coat and cold glare filled the doorway. "You've come far," Crowe said, voice like steel, "but it ends here." Elias stepped forward, placing himself between Crowe and the committee. "The message goes through, Crowe. You can try to stop us, but the cause is bigger than you." Crowe smirked, drawing his pistol. Chaos erupted. Maggie and Jonathan sprang into action, defending the committee members and creating space for Elias to secure the cipher. Shots rang out, furniture splintered, and the narrow cellar became a battlefield of wits and survival. Using a hidden trapdoor, Elias and Maggie managed to pull the committee members to safety while Crowe pursued. In the confusion, Jonathan created a diversion, toppling crates and scattering debris. Crowe's precision faltered, and Elias seized the moment to confront him directly. "You underestimate the revolution," Elias shouted, striking with all his strength. Crowe staggered, and in that instant, the committee members escaped, taking the cipher with them to safety. Frustrated, Crowe retreated, realizing that his obsession had been outwitted. He disappeared into the streets, patient, vengeful, but unable to stop the spark that had been lit. Outside, the sun rose higher. The colonies were awakening to a revolution that could no longer be contained. The intelligence Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan had delivered ensured that the northern campaigns would be prepared, that patriots could act with foresight, and that the rebellion would continue with renewed vigor. Elias turned to Maggie and Jonathan, exhausted but resolute. "It's done. The message is safe, and the cause lives." Maggie smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both relief and determination. "We did what we came to do. The revolution is bigger than any one man, bigger than Crowe." Jonathan nodded, looking toward the horizon where the city stirred to life. "And this is just the beginning. The spark has been lit." The Revolutionary War was a wild time full of action, and Elias, Maggie, and Jonathan were right in the middle of it. The three patriots walked into the awakening streets of New York, their mission complete, their courage and cunning having ensured that the revolution would survive. Crowe might pursue, obstacles would remain, and dangers would continue, but the cause they had risked everything for was unstoppable. The northern colonies were ready, the intelligence delivered, and the spark of rebellion had truly begun to blaze.